Vice President JD Vance will visit a steel fabrication facility in La Crosse, Wisconsin today, promoting President Trump's big, beautiful bill. This is part of the VP's multi-state tour. He was in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and South Carolina, highlighting the mega bill's benefits, such as no taxes on tips or overtime and a fair tax code favoring American companies. I want to bring in Wisconsin Congressman Scott Fitzgerald. He's a member of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman, so tell us about what to expect today.
Yeah, good morning. We're very happy to have the Vice President in Wisconsin today. I know he's got a number of stops over in western Wisconsin highlighting the big, beautiful bill. Listen, Cheryl, I think we're starting to cut through some of the rhetoric, and people are first starting to understand. They may even have touched base with their own accountants to see how those tax provisions are going to affect them personally. And it's something we've been, I think, kind of rank and file members have been waiting for, is to be able to break through with that message. And I think having the Vice President here in Wisconsin today will make that even better with kind of the bully pulpit that they have, and the way that, when the President or Vice President comes to your state, they garner certainly a lot of attention. And we're so glad that JD Vance is going to be here highlighting that big, beautiful bill.
How has the bill helped Wisconsin?
You know, I think if you look at the individual provisions, the stuff that we discussed and were very high profile when the bill was making its way through Congress, the Social Security stuff and the tax on tips, all the stuff that the president had discussed. But now what you're seeing is kind of the interplay between the federal tax code and what it looks like in some of these states. So if you are a young family, the impact of that is going to be significant. And that's certainly, I think, what people are starting to figure out. And there were a lot of critics early on that simply were kind of, throwing darts at the board, saying that, there's going to be fallout from this piece or that piece. Mm-hmm. But Chairman Jason Smith did a really, I think, wonderful job of keeping those provisions focused on certain sectors that we know need some help right now, coming out of the kind of the dreary days of the Biden economy. And obviously we avoided the falling off the cliff that would have been the tax increases if we weren't able to extend it. So no, I feel good about where we're at, and I think the messaging is really happening. And people are understanding it now.
Well, I think the next question, and I know when you go back to work next week, obviously maybe some more cuts, the rescissions package, or kind of finding other ways to maybe shrink what we've seen as a ballooning federal debt of $37 trillion at this point. The Senate Banking Committee is still trying to work on the framework for the Clarity Act and digital asset market structure. Senator Tim Scott, who chairs that committee, did give an update last week at the Fed's Jackson Hole Symposium. Watch this.
I believe that we'll have between 12 and 18 Democrats at least open to voting for a market structure, a far more complicated piece of legislation, and the forces against it, let me just say it clearly, like Elizabeth Warren, standing in the way of Democrats wanting to participate. It is a real force to overcome. We did it in the Genius side because I met with the few Democrats individually. I'm doing that already again, and I'm looking for folks off the committee to help provide cover for those on the committee to vote for it.
All right, Congressman, your reaction to those comments from him?
Yeah, I have no reason not to believe that the senator doesn't have a grasp on kind of where the Clarity Act is over in the Senate. It was something that had been discussed and debated within the House as to whether or not the Clarity Act could finally bring what was a debate about, is this a commodity? Is this a security? How should this be handled? How should this be defined? And the House did a great job of pulling that together. And, we kind of sent things over to the Senate, and And I have no reason not to believe that the Senate doesn't have a handle on that. So that's encouraging, and we'll see where we end up.
Yeah, I spoke with him on this program a few weeks ago, and he said if all goes according to plan, he's hoping to get everything completed on Clarity by October. So we'll continue to follow that. Also today, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is reportedly going to be briefing city council members on what's going to happen if the National Guard is deployed to the Windy City. Trump administration says the city may be the next stop on their crime crackdown push, following, of course, D.C., but state leaders are entirely against it. Governor Pritzker posted on X, "We're not going to stand idly by if he decides to send the National Guard to intimidate Chicagoans. Action will be met with a response." But there's the Chicago pastor, Corey Brooks. He blasted Democrats for, quote, outright lying about crime during a Fox News interview yesterday. Congressman, you, of course, are the neighbor of Chicago. You guys are right there together. What do you make of everything that you're seeing in the Windy City?
Yeah, I'm in Chicago all the time. I mean, it's certainly, I think, no secret to anyone that watches Chicago media on a regular basis that unfortunately the first couple of stories on local news is always about somebody either being certainly the subject of criminal activity or unfortunately the high murder rate. So I think what President Trump is doing is not only, I think, sending a message, but certainly I think is now having kind of a very practical application to what some of these mayors have been unable to do, which is to kind of pull together what they think would be a good mix of local policing and federal law enforcement to try and curb these. And you know, what President Trump is doing in D.C. has now become very quickly a blueprint for what I think we should see in some of these other urban areas that for decades we have just seen these statistics and numbers related to crime that have just been out of control. And you know, it's almost embarrassing, I think, when you see some of these local elected officials, especially in the spring, who say, well, get ready for the summer crime spike. You know, I mean, it's just become so normal for them that it's very difficult for them to even see, I think, what the president is really trying to do, which is to clean this up. Mm-hmm. And using, I think, the authority granted to him to deploy the National Guard for 30 days is obviously having an impact in D.C. And I think it can be applied in other larger cities throughout the states.
Even the mayor of D.C. acknowledged that, and 81% of Americans in this poll we were talking about at the top of the hour say 81% say that it's a major problem. Crime is a major problem. So the American people are behind this, but the leaders of Chicago seem to be trying to make a political statement here, unfortunately, and it's not a safe city, to your point. Congressman Scott Fitzgerald, it's great to have you here. Enjoy the day with the Vice President today in Wisconsin.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.